So my goal with this sermon series, this season of Lent, is to each Sunday make one aspect of Holy Week more meaningful to each of us when we go through and journey through Holy Week together with our reading services this year. So far, we've looked at the setup for Holy Week when Jesus healed Bartimaeus, teaching us not to look away from human suffering and to respond to struggle and suffering with compassion, not apathy. Next, we look at Jesus cleansing the temple and how we too can overturn tables in a good way when people are being taken advantage of. And last week we spent some time with Jesus at the end of a very, very long day when he was just done of being antagonized and attacked, and he finally let loose with what makes him angry, namely hypocrisy, and what breaks his heart. Like when we do not work towards justice and peace, and when we refuse to rest in the safety of God's open arms. And today we have reached Thursday of Holy Week. And there are so many things that happen so many important things that happened on Maundy Thursday that it's really hard to preach on just one moment. I mean, there's Jesus giving his disciples a new commandment: love one another as I have loved you. That's the reason we call it Maundy Thursday, because Maundy is related to command in Latin. Don't ask me how. I'm not a linguist, but that's why we call it Maundy Thursday if you were curious. So that's kind of important. And then Jesus interrupted the Passover celebration and instituted the sacrament, the mystery of Holy Communion. And then he washed his disciples' feet and told us to do the same, which sounds an awful lot like a sacrament. And we at one point did consider that to be sacramental in the Moravian Church. There was his agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, the betrayal by Judas, the betrayal by Peter, which Dave just read about, when Peter denied even knowing Jesus, the beginning of his trials, and then this long, long teaching moments with his disciples. And each of those warrants its own series of sermons. They are all that important. And today, because it's such a complicated day, we're not looking at a singular moment on Maundy Thursday, but the look on the face of Jesus at different moments on this evening. Kind of like if a picture is worth 1,000 words and a face can launch 1,000 ships, surely the look of the creator of the universe has 1,000 meanings. And it's very rare that we ask what Jesus conveyed with his expressions, because the Gospels don't give us that many details about what his face looked like. Yet we know that our body language and our facial expressions convey so much more than our words do. As I walk us through these moments and expressions, I invite you to place yourself in the story. If Jesus looked at you in these moments, what would his face convey? What would you need it to tell you? And I invite you to contemplate what look you want and need Jesus to give you now in this season of your life. But I do want to put up a guardrail and not leave this wholly and completely open. Jesus almost never did anything to make his followers feel guilt, or anyone feel guilt for that matter. Like he did not guilt the woman who was at the well, the woman who was caught in adultery, or any of the tax collectors with whom Jesus shared a meal. Nor did he guilt those who tortured, betrayed, and executed him. But the church has become very good at using guilt and making people feel guilty over the last several centuries. And I've said it before, and I say it again today, and I know I'll say it sometime in the future, probably not that long from now. If Jesus rarely ever used guilt, maybe we should not use it either. So I invite you, as you're reflecting and contemplating today, to try to understand these looks in a way that does not lead you to guilt, but just simply brings you closer to Jesus and more in line with who Jesus has called you and designed you and created you to be. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's look at some of these moments, these meaningful looks on Jesus' face. There are three main settings for the events of Maundy Thursday, and the first one is in the upper room, where Jesus washed his disciples' feet and instituted the Lord's Supper and did a whole bunch of teaching and reminding them of what was most important. And I always find it poignant, whenever I think about this, that Judas is included in the foot washing and in the first communion. I remember hearing, going through Holy Week readings and that line of, and Judas went out and it was night. I always thought about that when I was a child as happening so early. But once I realized that Judas doesn't do that until after both of these things happen, it's poignant that Judas is there. If Jesus included Judas in these two moments, who in the world are we to exclude anyone from Holy Communion? But that's a wholly different sermon for a different day, not this day. Instead, I want us to consider the look on Jesus' face when he washed the feet and shared bread and cup with the one who was soon to betray him. I want you to put yourself in this room. Try to picture it. I wonder if Jesus made eye contact with Judas or not. Personally, when he washed his feet, I don't think Jesus did, but that's mostly because I don't think I could bring myself to look at somebody's eyes as I was doing that, especially if they were my betrayer. A, it's awkward, and B, that's a lot of emotions. And I think it would be too painful for Jesus in this moment to look up from Judas's feet and look him in the eye. It'd be too overwhelming. And I'm sure, though, that even if he did or did not make eye contact with Judas in this moment, his face was a mixture of pain and love. And I think he kept his eyes down, focused on washing the feet that would soon walk to betray him, and doing that with as much love as he could. And I wonder if the complexity of this moment made Jesus slow down as he wrestled with his emotions while washing the feet of his betrayer in this act of incredible love. And if you were sitting where Judas was sitting, what look would you want to see on the face of Jesus as he washed your feet? And then a little bit later, when Jesus was done washing the disciples' feet and had put his own robe back on, and they were all reclining together to share in what Jesus knew to be his last meal, in that moment, Jesus no longer has a towel and a basin to occupy his hands, to occupy his vision. So it seems to me more likely that this is the moment when Jesus would have looked at all of his disciples in the eye and made that poignant moment with Judas. When he gave them bread and cup and said, "Take, eat, drink, this is my body, this is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." When Jesus looked at Judas in this moment, what did his gaze convey? And then still at the table a little while later, Jesus was talking about, "One of you will betray me as the one with whom I dip this bread into the bowl with." Surely when Judas and Jesus dipped their bread together, they made eye contact. And he has said to Judas, "Do what you have to do and do it quickly." What was that moment like? Was it a look pleading with Judas, "Please don't hurt me, don't do this"? Was it a sad look of understanding? Or did Judas catch a glimpse of anger on the face of his master? And we know that none of us are perfect. None of us live up to the standards that are set out for us. We've all done the wrong thing like Judas is about to. And when we're in the throes of missing the mark, what is the look that you need to see on the face of Jesus, like Judas might have needed in this moment? After this, the disciples stuck around for a long time, had a lot of teaching, a lot of remembering, while Judas went out and did what he needed to do. And then they left the upper room and went to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus needed to pray alone, but still needed his disciples to be there to support him. But they could not stay awake, and he was left to pray wholly and completely alone and in deep distress, pleading with God, "Take this cup of suffering away from me." This is one of the few moments in our readings for Holy Week when we stand up. Because in this moment, the true humanity of Jesus comes through in his intense fear of the pain that is to come. Here we see God experiencing the fear that every human being carries with them, that none of us are removed from, that being the fear of death. I'll never forget the first time I had a near miss in the car, and that was the first time I truly felt fear in my life, because that could have been death. Jesus experiencing that moment, that humanity, is worthy of awe and respect, and that's why we stand as we read those words and remember this moment. And today I ask you to consider, what was the look on Jesus' face as he prays alone in this deep distress? Does he shake uncontrollably from anxiety? Are there tears flowing from his eyes, or is he beyond tears? And when he looks up to heaven, what is the look that he gives his heavenly Father? Maybe it's the same look on your face when you are at your wit's end and you don't know what to do, when you don't know from where your help is going to come. What do you see on the face of Jesus in this moment of prayer? And then still in the garden, a little bit later, when Judas walks up to Jesus and kisses him on the cheek, completing his betrayal. When you're this close, how do you not look at somebody's face? So how does Jesus look at Judas? Does Judas see a look of resignation or fear or anger? Or does Judas look at Jesus and see an expression of forgiveness? That might seem crazy, but we know on the cross Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," and that most certainly included Judas, because he would not have been on the cross without Judas. Does Judas look at Jesus in this moment and see forgiveness? The last setting for Maundy Thursday after the upper room in the garden is the home of Caiaphas, the high priest. This is where Jesus would have been imprisoned for the night. It's where his trial started. It's where he received his first beating. And Peter is also there. And as you know, he is asked 3 times if he is a follower of Jesus, if he knows Jesus. And each time Peter says no. And as Peter responds the 3rd time, the Gospel of Luke says, at that moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. This is the moment that inspired this sermon, this look between these two. We know Jesus looked at somebody with intention. What look did Jesus give Peter that caused him to cry in this most poignant moment? mean, after all, this is Peter, the one whom Jesus named the Rock. This is Peter who said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," when no one else would say that or could get there. This is Peter whose mother-in-law was alive because Jesus raised her up. This is the same guy who said just a few hours earlier, "I would go and die with you rather than leave you alone." Jesus and Peter have a very complicated relationship. It's also the same Peter who said, Jesus told him, "Get behind me, Satan." Complicated relationship. What is the look that Jesus gives Peter in this moment? Surely Peter sees some evidence on his face of that first beating. Maybe Peter sees some of the fear and anxiety that undoubtedly comes from Jesus being a prisoner. Maybe this is the same look that Peter saw Jesus give many, many times in his ministry. A look of compassion for the turmoil and suffering that someone is experiencing. In this moment, Peter, because Peter is helpless to do anything to save his Savior. Maybe it's also a look of gratitude, because Jesus sees Peter, and even though Peter's not at the top of his game, Jesus is not alone in this moment. Even if it's at a distance, he is not alone. I really like that idea. I also like the idea that, like Judas, this could be a moment where Jesus gave a look of forgiveness, and that Peter weeps and sobs because he is unable to fathom how Jesus could forgive him in this moment. For us today, for you today, right now, what look do you see Jesus giving you? What look do you need to see on the face of Jesus as he looks at you in this season of your life? Whatever that look is, it is a look rooted in a deep love for you, deeper than we can fathom, wider than we can comprehend. So this week and this day, contemplate and pray on, how does Jesus look at you in that deep love?